House of the Dragon Episode 4 brings to mind a quote from Oscar Wilde. "Everything is about sex, except sex. Sex is about power." This episode predominantly follows Rhaenyra and Alicent, who kinda represent two different female narratives in this world. Early in the episode, they seem to have reconciled a little bit after the rocky relationship was seen between them in the last couple of episodes, and I've gotta say, I really love the sense of depth that we've managed to get from just a few scenes between the two of them, a sense of things having happened even if we didn't see them. But these two different narratives come from Rhaenyra resisting getting married at all, despite being the heir to the throne and a ton of political pressure, while Alicent married very young. She married the king, a position that she was kind of pushed into by her father, Otto the Hand. We're told in Game of Thrones that love is the death of duty, but inversely here we also see how duty can be the death of love, and of so much more. Rhaenyra is meant to pick between all these men from across the realm that she feels nothing for. Alicent says she has no real friends in the Red Keep. Even Viserys, her husband, is kinda dismissive of her in this episode. Duty is isolating. It deprives you of connection. So Rhaenyra is looking at Alicent and seeing someone who has chosen duty and has lost out on love, who has lost out on even a sense of themselves. She mocks the idea, saying, "Oh, how romantic it must be to be imprisoned inside a castle and made to squeeze out heirs," which is exactly the position that Alicent has found herself in. But one crucial difference that House of the Dragon explores is that for women, choosing duty is also losing agency, even more so than men. Later in the episode, she brings up to Viserys, you could father a dozen bastards and it wouldn't matter, no one would bat an eye, but I can't, and if I give birth, it may well be a death sentence. That's how her mother died in the first episode, Queen Emma. She died in childbirth. And, if I remember rightly, 20% of women died in the medieval period giving birth. So yeah, while men might choose duty and lose out on love as well, women lose on a deeply profound sense of agency. So Alicent is pretty rightfully kind of pissed that Rhaenyra doesn't appreciate the fact that she gets to pick who she lives with, who she marries, a choice that Alicent didn't really get herself. I've talked before about how Fire and Blood seemingly ignores, the problems of female agency across history. It'll attribute certain things to them that they didn't really get a choice in, or ignore the decisions they actually did make. I mean, it's written like a history book. It's written with those historic biases, and I really love seeing those differences between the show and the book in this. Alicent is portrayed across Fire and Blood to, have chosen this life for herself, and boy, have they nailed the emotional beats that underpin this perception, the kind that history often ignores. And Daemon's return in this episode really builds into this discussion as well, because to Rhaenyra, Daemon represents a kind of freedom and agency and escape that she doesn't seemingly have with other people. And I have to say, I really love how they juxtaposed Alicent having sex with Viserys against Rhaenyra going through a pleasure house with Daemon. Alicent is undergoing a kind of marital rape, a type of sexual violence that is often just totally ignored because, they're married, while Daemon is taking Rhaenyra through the city and saying, this is where people take what they want. These two scenes are juxtaposing sexual freedom and a lack of it, power and powerlessness. And to go back to that Oscar Wilde quote, sex is about power. And here, Rhaenyra is exercising a kind of power while Alicent is powerless. They actually did this juxtaposition of kind of male and female suffering or narratives in episode 1 as well. We had the tourney set against Emma's death. Both sides' blood was being shed, but it was in different ways. Again, though, in that scene, they highlighted that Emma did not choose to die. Viserys very literally made that decision for her while she cried to not. It's really uncomfortable because of that, The men maintain a degree of agency in both of these scenes across both of these episodes. And Rhaenyra rightfully wants that agency, which is why this scene flows into her flirting with and having sex with Sir Criston Cole, someone she actually wants. It's an expression of agency. Now, in the books, This event is very murky and muddled. There's a ton of different interpretations, so I'm going to read you the different theories as to how these played out. One source says Daemon seduced his niece, the princess, and claimed her maidenhood. Rhaenyra insisted that she was in love with her uncle and pleaded with her father for leave to marry him. While another says that Rhaenyra really wanted Criston Cole, and Daemon began, quote, giving her kissing lessons, how to best touch a man to bring him pleasure, to disrobe enticingly, suckle at her teats to make them larger and more sensitive. The princess could practice the art of pleasuring a man with her mouth, and at night he would smuggle her from the rooms dressed as a page boy and take her secretly to brothels, though he insists that Rhaenyra remained a maiden. But when at last she approached Sir Criston Cole, using all she had learned, Sir Criston was horrified and spurned her. So, part of Fire and Blood comes from a jester called Mushroom, whose main thing is basically everyone having sex with everyone else. But the episode did prove some of that, right? Broadly, though, the motivations for these different things seem to be different to the books. Like Daemon, why he took her down to the brothels and down to the city. There's also a line in the show where Daemon says that Rhaenyra seems more mature. And this might be kind of a reference in sentiment to a line that Daemon has in the books where he says, when he looks at you, he sees the little girl you were, not the woman you've become. The sentiment is there, right? Now, Sir Criston, I think, is rightfully very hesitant and nervous about getting involved with a princess because breaking vows is a big deal in this world. Could mean death for him. But Daemon has returned to King's Landing in this episode, having crowned himself King of the Narrow Sea. And this is straight from the book. Supposedly, Corlys gave him this crown. And I love the depth that his character has because you can interpret so many of his actions in a variety of ways. Why did he take Rhaenyra down to Flea Bottom and to see the brothel? Was it because he wanted to show her that the people weren't super on her side and the importance of diplomatic marriages? Or was it because he wanted to weaken her position? Because he wanted to go to Viserys and say, hey, wed her to me now? Fire and Blood suggests that might be the case. Why did he stop kissing her in the brothel but initially lean into it, I don't know what the right answer is necessarily. How did you interpret that beat in the story? Later in the episode, Daemon and Rhaenyra talk about marriage and she says, I feel like I'm being sold off for an army, and Daemon very frankly says there are worse things to be sold off for. That's because down in the Stepstones during that war, the crab feeders men took off women, girls, and comely boys to serve in their pleasure gardens and pillow houses. So he's both empathetic to her, but he clearly does want to sway her one way or the other. There's definitely the implication that he was using her here, but we've also seen that he does have a genuine affection for family. I think one of the things that this episode did really well was show how self-centered the Targaryens are in many ways. They will do and say anything, but they'll dress it up as it being about the family, And ultimately, they do kind of just believe that they're in charge of everyone, and they deserve to be so because they are the blood of the dragon. They are closer to the gods. I do have to mention one detail, all right? And this is a big spoiler. I want to be very clear, this is a big spoiler for the story to come, and if you do not want to get spoiled, skip to this timestamp. Alright? 3, 2, 1. So, Rhaenyra and Daemon are walking through the city, and there's all the different sorts of people down there, and one says, "Do you want to know how you're going to die?" And then immediately following that, there is a burst of flame from a metal dragon model's mouth. And I loved that detail, because Rhaenyra dies by dragon fire just like that later in the story. It's a neat little bit of foreshadowing. Okay, we are safe now, out of spoiler territory. I wouldn't normally do that, but I know that if I didn't bring it up now, I was going to forget that cool little detail. So, I also really like how we got to see the hidden passages all over King's Landing. These were supposedly built by Maegor the Cruel, but he had pretty much everyone who helped build them murdered so that they would be kept a secret. And keep that detail stored away in a little corner of your mind, because those passages are going to come back. Now, when Viserys gets wind of Daemon and Rhaenyra, He's pissed, alright? And he sends Daemon back to the Vale to be with his wife, who he calls the Bronze Bitch. Now, this actually played out a little bit differently in the book. He was actually sent back to the Vale after the events of episode 2, when he kind of took Dragonstone, and they went to kind of say, no, go away. Whereas here in the book, we're told that he was actually sent into exile, never to return to the Seven Kingdoms on pain of death. So maybe these two events were recorded incorrectly by the histories. I don't know. Now, one question that has probably come to most people is, why is Viserys so mad that Rhaenyra might get with her uncle? Because, you know, Targaryens. Viserys' own parents were brother and sister, and their parents before them. Viserys' own wife, Emma, was his cousin. This isn't that odd. Well, you know, I think that his outrage is really more to do with the politics of it. You know, he brings up, like, is this just about you trying to get on the throne? But I like that they're taking the time to explore that a little bit more. You know, Daemon says, oh, I'll take another wife. We've done that before. But to be clear, you know, historically, wars were fought over Targaryens having multiple wives. Like, that is something they do not do lightly anymore. I think another thing this episode did really well was explore Rhaenyra's flaws. You know, she just straight up said she doesn't care what the common people think. And that reminds me of Joffrey, you know, who said, like, oh, they'll obey because I am their king. But it's a lot more complicated than that. At the end of the episode, she presents that she's willing to be married because that's her duty. But we also see that after her night with Daemon, she is not willing to give up that freedom and agency. And we're gonna see what problems that causes down the line. I won't say anything more. Then she straight up lies to Alicent about her time with Daemon. She swears on her mother's grave, which I think really helps us understand why Alicent might eventually turn on her. You know, this one person in whom she thought she might have found a friend inside the Red Keep, and she's lying to her. She's kind of betraying her. She doesn't treat her that well. In the books, there's definitely the impression that Alicent is kind of a villain from the start. She's out for her own blood, for her own power. But boy, you know, they really make you care about her. They really make her situation so much more complicated. One of the beautiful things about the Dance of Dragons is how far everyone falls. And knowing what's to come, I think these decisions are going to make all of that hit so much harder. The last thing I want to mention is Mysaria's return, right? A pretty minor character, the White Worm, she's called. We get very little detail about who she is or what she wants in the book. She's mentioned like 20 times and then only briefly, so the show is a real expansion of her character. But in the book, she's mostly portrayed as Daemon's ally, which is why it's interesting that she is seemingly like Otto's ally in this series. She's sending him information. Now, at this point in Westeros history, there's no Master of Whispers like Varys, you know, gathering rumors and information. So she's kind of a precursor to that. But I do think that we're going to see an evolution in her relationship with Daemon. And again, you know, those themes of female agency come up through her because she's just trying to find a sense of security for herself however she can. The episode ends with Otto being dismissed as Hand, as part of kind of a deal that Rhaenyra will marry for political purposes. Now, we're told in the books that Alicent pestered the king to make Aegon his heir, and Otto pushed and pushed for this as well, till Viserys was like, no, go away, I don't want you anymore. Again, though, here, Alicent is being blamed for Otto's pressure, like that's how they're framing it mostly, whereas in the show, you know, we see the awkward position that Alicent is in. It doesn't feel wise that Viserys was so undiplomatic about dismissing Otto, a very powerful man from a very powerful family, but again, this is a little bit in line with his character. He's a clumsy king who gets angry when it comes to family, and you know, Rhaenyra makes it about family. She says that he cares more about the High Towers than what we, the Targaryens, need. He's not a good advisor, and so he sees it more as a political betrayal, I guess, in a way, than necessarily just like a political necessity. And this is quite different, I think, to where characters are just dumb or needlessly emotional. You know, like Viserys has shown that his emotions or his, you know, style of leadership repeatedly gets in the way of the good of the realm. It's well within that. Yeah. I think, though, ultimately, this episode, the characters really came into their own for me. I didn't really talk about this that much at the start, but I kind of felt at the beginning in those first couple of episodes that the characters didn't feel as distinct, as different from one another as, in Game of Thrones, like, everyone spoke really differently. Everyone had such a distinct, unique presence when you compare, Tywin and Ned and Robert and Varys. And I didn't get that as much in the early episodes, but I think that this one really does seal that, especially after the last episode. I was sort of taken aback with how much I cared, how much I felt when Daemon and Viserys reunited and kind of reconciled, about how much I felt when Alicent and Rhaenyra were talking. There were emotional beats there that I was like, oh, wow, I care about these characters. I'm so happy that I care about these characters, What did you think of this episode, though? Stay nerdy, and I'll see you in the future.